Warpdrive is a personal and collaborative tool for building automations. Warpdrive is designed for individuals and small teams to automate their desktop tasks. It lets you create smart desktop macros that can span a few steps to hundreds across any desktop or browser app. As an example, you might start in Excel, go to Salesforce, and then finally an internal app custom built for your company. Let's see how that works. Let's go ahead and log into Warpdrive. And when we log in, we get a standard folder organizational dashboard. You have your recent favorite examples. What we're going to do is we're going to jump straight in and try to create a warp. Okay. So we click the plus button. It opens up a recorder. That's a key important point here. And what I'm going to do with that recorder is I'm going to do my task exactly as I normally do it. So we have the Warpdrive recorder widget on the bottom right. And the task that I want to do is pull up a stock ticker, get its data, and screenshot what I see from Google Finance and then send an email out. No, a really important thing here is that I am doing exactly what I normally do. I'm going across applications, native applications, browser, all of that. What Warpdrive is doing is it's learning what I'm doing. And importantly, the moment I click done, there I save the recording and it's processing for a second, but now it's done. And I have the automation available to me right off the bat. So if I click it now, let's say I have something new in the clipboard, this time the Amazon ticker, and it's going, and now my hands are off the keyboard and the mouse, and it's doing the task for me. Note the benefits of this approach. So I converted a recording to an automation without any programming and in zero turnaround time, essentially. It does take, depending on the length of the recording, it can take a second or two, but essentially you get an automation right off the bat. You have immediate utility. And one thing that I didn't show is once you get back to the dashboard, you have the ability in a very standard Google Doc style format, you get a share link. And if you wanted to save that for yourself or for any of your coworkers, that is very viable. Another important thing is that Warpdrive allows you to learn from multiple recordings. We're not going to show that in this demo, but it gets more intelligent the more recordings you do. So intelligent attended automations are a great time saver, but they are automations after all. And you're typically paranoid about doing automated stuff. So how can we make warps be careful? So imagine you're filling out expense sheets, so Gusto being your expense system, and supposing you want to create an automation to submit expenses, right? So let's go ahead and do our usual thing. We are going to start off with Gusto, go into expenses, and right now I'm running the recorder, so I'm doing my task exactly as I would. I'm going to fill out some like sample values here and then submit an expense. And for the purposes of keeping it clean, I'm going to delete that expense. Cool. Now, if I stop and it's processing, it's done. If I run this, it's going to do exactly what I said. It's going to fill out those fields and come back and do the deletion. Now, we can edit this workflow. It takes me step by step, and I might want to add some validations. Am I actually on the expense page, right? So I can put in a few checks and balances to make sure that I am not operating on a page that is not the one that I want. So adding a few expenses. Here I'm also setting breakpoints. This is where I want the system to pause and delegate control back to me, to the user, so that I can go in and fill whatever values I want. Now the step-by-step editing process is key to making warps more useful than just you have a recording and playing it back. So now if I warp this, it's going to go do the validations and then pause at exactly all the breakpoints that I wanted to pause. So for instance, if I wanted to pause at the amount field, I go ahead and fill my amount field, and then I continue on with the warp as I had designed it. And again, I'm probably going to delete it for the purposes of this demo. But as you can see, now I have a more intelligent warp that breakpoints at the steps that I wanted to breakpoint. And if anything is off, it will just stop. It won't proceed with the automation if any of the validation that I put in do not succeed. And now for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to go ahead and add a few more validations on the confirmation screen. Do I have a view expense as the final screen that I'm looking for? Is the amount actually populated? And I don't know what amount I'm going to be running to during the warp. So I'll go ahead and say that it should start with the dollar amount, that it is present. And if that is the case, then go ahead with the warp. And I'm going to skip the delete step and then go back to the dashboard itself. So up until this point, we have learned how Warpdrive allows you to turn recordings into automations. And we have also seen how you can make them safer. Now with this core functionality, we're ready to have some fun. You can start thinking about kicking all of this off from elsewhere. For example, from Excel. Supposing you have a spreadsheet with a bunch of stock tickers and you want to create recordings by selecting a single row. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a single row that I started off with, and I'm going to go into Google Finance again. And now I'm pasting the data that was available in that row. We already saw that we can do a lot of complicated things, but for the purposes, I'm just going to compare that against, let's say, Google. I'm going to create a chart and you do everything else that we did before. But for the purposes, I'm just going to copy the URL here and not actually do it, because we know that you can convert it into more sophisticated recordings. Now, going back into Excel, what I could do is I can select a whole bunch of these things and then run the same warp over and over again. And again, if you imagine the scenario that we had earlier we were taking a screenshot and then we were sending an email. You can do all of that over an entire data set now. Again, you record, you make Warpdrive learn from a single row using the core functionality that it has based on that single screen recording. Now you have an automation that can be run over a whole data set and you're saving yourself a whole lot of time and effort. Now, another great thing about thinking of this tie-in of Warpdrive alongside other applications is that you can essentially think of it as an extension of Excel. Here I am going in, and instead of trying to create an ultra intelligent automation that compares based on the technology sector or the energy sector, I'm using Excel to slice and dice my data. And because automations are so cheap to create, I can create 10 different automations for 10 different use cases that I have. For instance, if I want automation for a comparison against the healthcare data set, healthcare tickets, then I can do that and then run my automation over this new data set immediately right after I created it. So I don't need to go out and create a overly sophisticated automation that does a bunch of branching and other things. I can think of it in conjunction with the apps that I already use, as an example here, Excel, and then use the core functionality that Warpdrive provides, which is immediate conversion of screen recordings into automations, to think of that as an extension beyond what I can do in the original app. So we're going to let this run through the last few seconds, and while it's doing that, let's observe. In less than 8 minutes, we created 3 different automations. We added safety validations to them, and were able to automatically run them across different things. So, in summary, what is Warpdrive? Warpdrive is the Dropbox of automations. It allows you to create human in the loop, personal, effortless, shareable automations. The Warpdrive way is to record, preview, edit, add checks, and immediately be able to warp an automation and share it with your coworkers. The capabilities that it provides: personal desktop automations with zero effort, zero programming, and zero external cost; portable, shareable across any of your machines or with any coworkers. We think of these as disposable automations with zero overhead. If any underlying assumption change, you just re-record it and you get a new automation. You can combine multiple recordings into a single intelligent automations. And these are human in the loop warps. You can make them as automated or as human centric as you want. So we showed the features of Warpdrive in the context of 3 arbitrarily chosen workflows. The key takeaway, though, should be that Warpdrive can automate anything that can be done manually on a desktop, which means tasks within operations, customer success, HR, or even turning manual QA testing into automated QA testing are viable possibilities. We hope this quick demo was useful, and we look forward to hearing about your automation needs.